This is the farthest that I can take you on company space bucks, Robin. You sure you want this? The research is in everything.
It is to me. And Sam. I need to know what happened.
The meteor storm.
I can use it for cover from Altera's eyes.
Gonna miss you, Robin.
I'll find my way back.
After doing a well-received video on Subnautica's level design and story, several of you asked me to do a video on Subnautica Below Zero to see what I thought of the changes. Just like my video on Subnautica, I'll mainly be focusing on the level design and narrative, but provide at least a small mention about some of the other changes. I began looking at its reviews on Steam, seeing that it is rated as very positive, and this struck me as odd given that much of what I'd seen online is that the game isn't that good. This sentiment was echoed by some of you in the comments, so when the game went on sale a day later, I took it as a sign to buy it there and then and get to playing it once I'd finished my reimagining video on Fallout 4's Minutemen. Now before I begin, I want to say two things. First and foremost, this video is my opinion and you may feel completely differently and are entitled to your own thoughts. I will be showing thumbnails from other YouTube videos, but this is not a criticism of those people or even their opinions about Below Zero, some of which I agree with. Second, I'm going to front load the information of this video so that if you're just here for a recommendation, you can take what you need from the first 5 minutes and leave. But I do recommend sticking around, as some of my opinions and analysis may surprise you and change your mind about certain things. So let's get started. Is Below Zero better than Subnautica? No, I don't think so. Is Below Zero as good as Subnautica? Again, sadly no, I can't say that it is. Is Below Zero a good game? Yes, I think it is. Is Below Zero worth playing? Yes. I feel that anyone who enjoyed Subnautica will also enjoy Below Zero despite its shortcomings. Why do I recommend it despite my answers to questions 1 and 2? To me, this game feels like a mix between a spin-off and a test for various ideas that came up during the end of Subnautica's development. Rather than try to haphazardly cram these ideas in as DLC, as they had initially planned to, Unknown Worlds decided to split these ideas into a new game and focus on expanding the lore of the Subnautica universe while trying to improve on the original formula. I think that when viewed both in isolation and compared to Subnautica, Below Zero does have some good qualities. I'll be breaking down my thoughts on Below Zero into the following parts. What Below Zero gets wrong and why I think that is. What Below Zero gets right and why I think that is. What I think Below Zero means for the future of the Subnautica series and how I think it'll affect the upcoming Subnautica 2. And finally, conclusion. The story of Below Zero didn't flow as well as Subnautica's did. It was incredibly stop and start at several points, which forced me to search online for help. The first reason for this is that players start with less tech than in Subnautica. The primary missing tech was the habitat builder, which seriously held me back. It contributed to my rather unhelpful collection of floating lockers outside of the drop pod. It was on my second playthrough that I realised you don't start with locker blueprints either, which I found quite alarming. Wait, I didn't start with a locker. I didn't start with lockers. Okay, that I didn't notice in my first playthrough. That's crazy. The second reason, which ties into the first, is that a lot of scavenged technology is unhelpfully hidden or in unmarked locations. The prime example of this for me was the high-capacity oxygen tank. I searched for the high-capacity tank, which almost led to me drowning several times, and I got so fed up of this that I had to search for it online. Once I'd found it, I also found the habitat builder by chance, which is probably the only reason I didn't search for that online. In Subnautica, players were led to new technology by distress beacons, which would have wreckages nearby. I'll let my previous video explain my point. This wreckage near LifePod 17 highlights another excellent part of Subnautica's level design. Nearby almost all of the life pods, there are wreckages which often hold a huge amount of fragments. Life pods act as an organic way to lead players into new biomes, and then placing wreckages nearby helps to feed the player a steady stream of new technology, much of which is essential for progressing with the story. Having vital technology in unmarked locations really hinders the gameplay and story, as it made it impossible to reliably progress to the next point. The third reason is that the game lacks a clear objective at several points. I had to search online for how to disable the Altera satellite tower, as a piece of tech contained a component I'd never seen or heard of. No clear indication is given that the component is located inside of the wreckages that you can see in certain areas of the game. I also had to search for how to progress with Alan's quest for a body. The quest to build Alan a body is quite slow. Alan will periodically tell you a piece of architect technology is nearby and will give you a marker. Scanning a certain number of these will eventually give you a marker for a body part, of which there are 3. However, it doesn't flow very well. Alan will also give you information about body part locations outside of the process of scanning architect technology.
There is something of significance beyond this bridge. It was important to Altera, but more important to me.
Will it help us build you a body?
I believe so, yes.
However, he gives these to you so far ahead of time that it can become difficult to follow or remember what he's talking about, and the body parts themselves aren't marked after these messages.
The network is indicating more of my people's technology, but the images I'm receiving are fragmented, repeated. I am struggling to locate them precisely.
Fragmented images? Why would that happen?
I can only theorize that the locations are deep and shielded by a refractive material. Perhaps amongst large crystal formations.
Combined with the fact that architect markers are added very slowly to the PDA, left me feeling without direction multiple times. In my first playthrough, I correctly guessed that the parts would be in the furthest away places. The story was much easier to follow on my second playthrough, which might say more about me than the game, but even in my second playthrough I still had to search online to reinforce my knowledge due to the slow moving moments. There are 4 major issues with the story itself. First is the clarity. The story of Sam and her death was quite difficult to understand in my first playthrough, and even after I finished it, I wasn't sure that Altera had been attempting to mutate the Kharaa bacterium. I was only certain they were studying it. The pieces I was misunderstanding only became clear on my second playthrough. Altera was studying and mutating Kharaa with the stated intention of advancing biology research.
We've studied the first Kharaa bacteria samples from the specimen. Results are promising. We were able to stimulate rapid multiplication of cells in a controlled environment, resulting in the creation of several different mutations with potentially useful applications. Think of the possibilities. Life-saving treatments, genetic research. It could be a window to understand the evolution of life on this planet. The findings could move us forward by years.
However, Sam was unconvinced that the benefits outweighed the risks and attempted to convince her colleagues to help her stop the research, but fails.
Anyway, I've looked into it, and I think we have reason to be concerned. It wasn't that long ago this planet was uninhabitable. But if we work together, we can get them to put an end to the Kharaa mutation experiments.
I'm not comfortable with this.
Samantha, you're paranoid.
Come on now, you're Sam out. She has our safety at heart.
And the rest of us don't?
Zeta!
Can we play the game now?
Fine.
Sam then decides to synthesize a dose of the enzyme 42 cure and use it to cure the frozen Leviathan, which would destroy Altera's ability to conduct further research.
I've synthesized the antibacterial agent. I know my biochem at least well enough to do that much. I've stashed some away in one of the Pengling research caves, southeast of the Leviathan. That was probably the easy part. Now I just have to carry out the plan. Focus, be brave, worry about what happens next after the threat is neutralized.
However, Sam then meets Marguerite Mader, who has survived over a decade on the planet, and convinces Sam to abandon her cure plan and instead bomb the Omega Lab and Phi excavation site. with Maida requesting that she be the one to destroy Omega Lab as she would derive satisfaction from it.
Is the bacteria a threat, or isn't it?
It is.
Does it need to be dealt with or not?
It does.
So who's right on this?
I am.
Say it like you mean it.
I am.
I said like you mean it, not like you're testifying before a rigged transgov court.
I am.
Great. Then what you gotta do is seal off the whole cave. I've got just the stuff. Made it for fishing, but it blew the whole ice shelf halfway to deep space. Vaporized all the fish.
Okay.
And you gotta hit the lab too, or there's just no point. Actually, you know what? Let me take care of that one. It'll be fun.
Maida successfully destroys Omega Lab, but Sam is caught planting her bomb by her colleague, Parvin Ivanov. She tries to convince him not to enter the site, but he enters anyway, and with all her time wasted, the bomb detonates, with the resulting cave collapse killing them both.
Parvin, stand back. Don't come any closer.
Why? What are you up to?
Parvin, I mean it. Stop.
The second story issue is the nonsensical investigation. What makes no sense to me is the fact that the investigator, Alexis, believes that the cause of Sam's and Parvin's death was negligence. She was clearly caught in the process of sabotaging an Altera facility in a similar manner to the previous attack on Omega Lab, and Alexis just says,
What are you doing? Nothing in her file suggests a history of vandalism or carelessness. And yet, I can only conclude that the cause of the collapse was employee negligence. We will need to investigate a possible connection to the explosive damage reported at Omega Lab. If there is a connection, who is responsible?
Many people online seem to agree with Alexis's conclusion, but this makes no sense. The definition of negligence in the dictionary is failure to give enough care or attention to someone or something that you are responsible for. Sam's formal responsibility within Altera is the development of robotics, not the demolition of corporate research facilities. The only person responsible for negligence in this situation is Parvin Ivanov, the security guard, who was somehow able to let a researcher with no military experience sneak past him, despite the fact that the only path to the frozen Leviathan goes right past his front door. What would have been far more sensible is if Sam had been charged with sabotage, which is defined as to intentionally damage or destroy something, for example equipment or a system, that belongs to someone else so that it cannot be used. On a minor note, if Sector Zero has been searched and analysed as part of a criminal investigation, then why are so many PDAs left behind in Altera areas? I would have thought that these would be collected and secured as evidence. The third issue is Maida's involvement in the story, which seems very forced and in regards to Robin is completely pointless. Robin meets Maida on Delta Station Island and follows her to her hidden base among the sea lily biome. Maida will then drop some hints that she knows something about Sam's death and Altera's involvement, but says she won't help whilst the Altera satellite tower is active. After the tower is disabled, Maida tells you to meet her at her greenhouse, and then proceeds to tell you what you already know, that Altera was experimenting with Kara and that Sam tried to stop them. The only real information we learn from this is that Maida is the one who blew up Omega Lab, but this doesn't change the fact that Omega Lab is wrecked, Sam is dead, and the source of the problem, the frozen Leviathan, still needs to be dealt with. On a more minor note, it's never established how Maida survived her Kara infection. The Kara bacterium kills its host within a few weeks of infection, and the Degassi, the ship which brought Maida and the Torgals to 4546b, crashed 10 years before Subnautica's story. Even if there had been a simple or contrived reason for her surviving her infection, it would have been better than just not addressing it at all. It doesn't take away from the story, but it is important to mention as it damages the world building and disregards established rules and law. The fourth and biggest problem with the story is that curing the frozen Leviathan is completely optional. I only discovered this after completing my second playthrough and started watching some other YouTubers' videos to see what other people thought of Below Zero and maybe put my own thoughts into a wider context. I knew that building Alan's body was the only way to finish the game and get off the planet. However, I thought that curing the frozen Leviathan was required, given how much time and effort is spent talking about and implying that Robin is here for closure and making her sister's death count for something. The fact that the story can be ended without curing the frozen Leviathan can only be described as narrative whiplash. In my video on Subnautica, I made this chart to show how well the storylines intersected and contributed to the primary storyline of curing yourself and escaping. So to show how the story of Below Zero goes, I adapted it and got this. The primary storyline, Robin investigating her sister's death, is shown along the centre with its major moments. Then Maida's storyline is shown along the top, with it ending abruptly and only linking back to what Robin already knows. The secondary storyline, building Alan's body, is shown along the bottom. It doesn't really interact much with the primary, as Alan only really provides lore and hints to his own story. But it runs parallel to the primary, so it works fairly decently. But once you get to this point, it usurps the position of primary and relegates Robin and Sam to secondary. This damages the story's payoff. In both my playthroughs, I cured the frozen Leviathan, which does provide the full story payoff, but the fact that this was made optional was short-sighted. The map of Below Zero is smaller and shallower than Subnautica, and whilst this alone isn't necessarily a problem, I do think that certain areas of the map are not well designed. I hated the Arctic Spires biome. Subnautica and most of Below Zero has always lent itself to a slow but steady exploration style, but the Arctic Spires forces a kind of sprint play style, where I had to quickly move from place to place, never taking the time to actually get to look around. It was mainly down to ice worms, an incredibly aggressive and hostile land-based Leviathan, which is extremely difficult to deter, and if it attacks you, you can't dodge or repel it like you can with the sea-based Leviathans by using a perimeter defense system or diagonal maneuvers. The Thumper is a piece of mining equipment that can be used to kind of repel the ice worms and prevent them from attacking you if you're within the radius. However, it isn't very good. You still have to pick it up and move it, but by the time you need to use it again, it's too late. Plus, it runs out of battery way too quickly. I found that in the end I just had to run around the edge of the Arctic Spires area to avoid being attacked. I didn't really get to explore the location, it felt like more of an endurance test and I didn't enjoy it. The depth of Below Zero's map also creates some issues. In both of my playthroughs, I was able to reliably explore the lily pads without the high capacity tank with little difficulty, and was able to get the ultra high capacity tank. In my second playthrough, I didn't even realise that I hadn't been using it until I went to craft the ultra high capacity tank. Wait, what? Oh, I didn't even build myself the high cap tank. Shit. This leads to what I'm calling a content compression issue. The Below Zero map has the same amount of technology as Subnautica, but as it's all been compressed into a smaller area, you're able to make large strides without certain technologies, and this leads to some technologies feeling pointless. It feels like the team at Unknown Worlds was vaguely aware of this issue, as the depth modules for the prawn suit have been changed. One issue that really sucked a lot of tension out of exploration was the overall lack of aggression from supposedly predatory sea creatures. The various predators such as the Cryptosuchus, the brute shark, the squid shark and the rock puncher show a complete disregard for my presence unless I went out of my way to invade their personal space. But even then, I didn't feel threatened due to the lackluster resistance they put up. This is in stark contrast to Subnautica, where predators would constantly harass me within seconds of being within aggro range. The Chelicerate is also strangely docile, which is particularly weird given that it is supposed to be the equivalent of the Reaper, which is incredibly aggressive. There were several times where I almost ran directly into the Chilicerate due to how silent and docile it is, and I very rarely felt threatened by them. One exception to the creatures being less aggressive than in Subnautica is the Shadow Leviathan, which would move to attack me even when it couldn't possibly see me enter its area. The aggressiveness of Shadow Leviathans was a welcome change and made me feel like I was actually on a hostile planet. I felt at several points throughout the early game that my movement speed was groggy or somehow different. I thought at first this was because I hadn't played Subnautica in a while, but as the feeling persisted, I decided to search it up online and found that the movement speed had been reduced, with a lot of people speculating that this was to make the smaller map feel bigger. Unknown Worlds hasn't gone on record stating this, so it will remain as speculation. But if that was the reason behind it, then it failed. I could tell by how quickly I was able to reach important locations and the map's edge that the game was smaller. The grogginess of the movement speed did frustrate me at times, but it wasn't my biggest issue, hence why it's in miscellaneous. It feels like the devs were somewhat aware that the speed nerf was an issue, as there is an absurdly large amount of sea glide spawns in the starting area. Either that, or this relates to the content compression issue I mentioned in 1C. In Subnautica, the only rock outcrop that provides titanium was the limestone outcrop. In Below Zero, however, all rock outcrops have the chance to drop titanium in addition to their other resources. In my first playthrough, I wasn't sure how I felt about this change, but in my second playthrough I began to strongly dislike it, as I found myself drowning in titanium while struggling to get big enough surpluses of lead and gold. Now, I do use a lot of titanium, and I find that this helps prevent me from running low. However, it makes resource gathering incredibly unreliable, which annoys me greatly. The mineral finder seemed, on the surface, like a good tool. However, it didn't take long for me to realise that its range is incredibly short, and that only being able to search for one material at a time just isn't practical. I assumed that its comically short range and one component search was a clear indication that it could be upgraded at the modification station, but no, it can't be improved. For this reason, it's rendered utterly useless the second the player builds a scanner room with a HUD chip. Even before that, however, I found it easier and more efficient to just swim around with the Sea Glide looking for anything I needed, rather than being guided by the slow mineral finder. But don't worry, there is a use for this little guy later. The starting area in Below Zero, called the Sparse Arctic, feels far less friendly than the safe shallows of Subnautica, and I think this is a good thing. Many players, myself included, often feel hesitant to leave the safe shallows and venture out, as there's quite a sudden spike in tension and perceived danger. The overall darkness, resource sparseness, and overall similarity between the Sparse Arctic and Twisting Bridges biome made it feel far easier and more natural to shift to exploring other biomes. I quite liked how Alan and Robin interacted with each other. They had good dialogue, and Alan provided additional information about the Subnautica universe, which, as a world builder, I always appreciate. Also, Alan is somewhat interactive with your progress in the game. During my first playthrough, I found the fabricator before finding all the body parts, and he will comment on this.
This is the fabrication facility where we will construct my next form. We must first locate all the necessary components.
His presence also affects how Robin talks about Outpost Zero.
Was she right? Could there be architects living on this planet? Alterra really messed up if they got that one wrong. What did Alterra use this place for?
Researchers here were trying to find me. Lil wanted to know too much about architects. I could not let her. She was, what do you call them, Alteran.
What did you think she would do to you?
She might have discovered the gateway to our home world. I thought it wiser not to take the chance.
I didn't explore all the potential options that might be affected, but from what I did see, it's a great touch. I'm not sure how much of a future voice protagonists and conversational NPCs has in this series, but what's in Below Zero I quite like. People either seem to awkwardly love or vehemently hate the sea truck. Personally, I fall into the awkwardly love camp. The sea truck for me was a perfect in-between vehicle when compared to the sea moth and Cyclops. So often in Subnautica, I would leave to build an outpost in a different biome, only to get to the build site and realise that I had made some kind of counting error with crafted materials and have to travel back to base. The alternative to this was to turn the Cyclops into a mobile base to carry the supplies and fabricator, but the Cyclops is not fast and quite big, making it not ideal for getting into caves and ravines or outrunning leviathans. It's also only available in the late game. The sea truck is the perfect answer to this issue, small and nimble enough to explore, but with its modules able to fit lots of materials and make crafted materials with its fabricator. Now I will agree that its implementation is not perfect. It feels very sluggish in terms of movement speed, and I do find myself bumping into things a lot due to its size, meaning that I'm often having to repair it. But I don't think these are deal breakers, and I liked using it. Just like in Subnautica, Below Zero adheres to the good level design principles identified in Slay the Dragon. The starting area is made up of broken and intermingled biomes, although not to the same extent as Subnautica. There is a goal in finding out the truth about Sam's death, and a complication in needing to build Alan a body to escape. Levels move the story forward. Levels have multiple and mini goals. Levels have bosses. Players can get into gameplay quickly. Levels increase player agency, and levels enhance the player through providing new technology and lore. I think this is why Below Zero is as loved as it is, despite its criticisms. The winning formula, the thing that made Subnautica so good, is still there, and players can feel it. The sound design in Subnautica was absolutely incredible, and I didn't think it could get any better. But lo and behold, Below Zero somehow goes above and beyond. Roars in the distance and the incredible sound of some of the predator animals had me on edge even in places where I knew I was safe. The Recyclotron is an absolutely marvellous addition to the game. Anything you've crafted but don't need anymore can be thrown into this thing and returned to its base components, which is amazing. Built the mineral finder 9 hours ago, only to realise it's not very good. Chuck that bad boy into the Recyclotron and get back the parts and make them into something useful. The smaller size of Below Zero made it far more worthwhile to build ion batteries and power cells. The size of Subnautica made me place outposts for charging and exploration, meaning that I didn't really need ion power, as I had fully charged power cells all over the map if I needed them. The smaller size of Below Zero meant that it was far easier to build ion power than another base. I did build another base in the Crystal Caves, but this was before I realised that the map wasn't as deep as I thought. I personally think that Below Zero is going to be remembered as that game that wasn't as bad as some YouTube thumbnails made it out to be. Was it worse than Subnautica? Yes, its slightly inferior level design and weak story hold it down. However, like I said in the introduction, I feel like it was supposed to be a stepping stone between Subnautica and Subnautica 2. To me, it feels like a handful of ideas for items, vehicles and lore that the team at Unknown Worlds had towards the end of Subnautica's development but couldn't realistically implement. So instead of jamming them in haphazardly, they used them as an opportunity to expand the Subnautica universe and give fans another game to hold them over until Subnautica 2 is released. I think that Below Zero and the lessons learned from it are going to have a positive effect on Subnautica 2. The negative changes made in Below Zero can easily be modified or reversed, and the positive changes can easily be adapted and moved across to the sequel. As the teaser trailer has shown, Subnautica 2 is possibly going back to a more tropical looking environment, and they're continuing with the trend of creating new leviathans. It seems like the sea truck is here to stay in one form or another, which to me signals their intention to learn from the shortcomings of Below Zero. And this is the point I've been trying to make. I think Unknown Worlds made the same design decisions for Below Zero as they made for Subnautica, but just implemented them slightly weaker in order to adapt them to the new ideas they had. The winning formula is still there, and I could feel it as I played. I personally think that Below Zero is a good game. It has 88,000 reviews, with 90% of them being positive, which is an incredible achievement. Subnautica was always going to be a tough game to follow up on, and I think they did a good job whilst trying to implement new ideas and lore. I would recommend Below Zero to anybody who was thinking about buying it if it was on sale. I want to thank you all for watching and for 3,000 subscribers. It's blown my mind how quickly the channel is starting to pick up pace. I've set up a donation page for anyone who wants to help support my work. I'm trying to work out some plan to give a little extra bits to anyone who donates, but for now it'll be special thank yous at the end of videos. All the money donated goes towards improving the channel, none goes to me. For those of you who are here for Fallout content, I'm happy to let you know that the Institute Reimagined is in the works and is progressing at great speed. I'm going to be focusing on writing and faction reimaginings for a little while, as I want to finish Fallout 4's factions and work on some other projects. I'm going to be announcing a roadmap for the channel as I get closer to concluding my current Fallout 4 video ideas list. Once again, thank you all for watching and have a lovely day.